between the host and the listeners about their relationships. This show is not an attempt to assess, diagnose, or treat any mental health or illness condition. Please consult your physician, psychiatrist, or psychotherapist for personal matters.
Inner Voice, a heartfelt chat with Dr. Foojan.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Inner Voice Show. I'm Dr. Foojan Zeine, and I have Sean in studio. This is a show about what matters most in life, our minds, our thoughts, feelings, actions, relationships, and our fulfillment in this beautiful journey of life. In this show, I'll bring you two latest research about writing your to-do list, and it does help you sleep. And then the other one is how narrative expressive writing protects you against harmful cardiovascular effects of stress related to marital separation or divorce. Then I will speak to Alan Gelb, author of 7 Steps to Confident Writing. I used it. It was amazing. We'll tell you about it. You can call us and talk to Alan or I, and on studio line 951-922-3532 if you like. Be sure to listen to my podcast on iTunes and Stitcher and share it with your friends. Write reviews on it. Call me or text me or email me. Go to Foojan.com and let me know. If there are topics that you're really interested and you want me to talk about it, you want me to get experts to come in and talk about it, please, please, please let me know. Connect with me. We'll be right back with the tip of the week.
Join the conversation every Monday afternoon at 3 p.m. Pacific for Inner Voice Heartfelt Chat with Dr. Foojan. Dr. Foojan is a radio and TV host, international speaker, psychotherapist, life coach, and the author of Life Reset, The Awareness Path to Create the Life You Want. She brings you the latest research and interviews with experts in the field of cognitive sciences. Anyone who loves to grow and create growth for humanity gets a voice on this call-in show. Inner Voice Heartfelt Chat with Dr. Foojan. Monday afternoons at 3 p.m. Pacific on Smart Talk KMET 1490 AM and on KMET1490AM.com.
So this is the tip of the week. Now, I wish that you all had an amazing 4th of July and you are all safe from the earthquakes and shakeups. It was scary. I wasn't here. I was in Vegas, but I felt it. The whole tower went back and forth, and I was really scared. So I hope everybody's safe and everybody's doing well. This week I've been away from my usual scheduled life and have been writing for 12 hours a day. Yes, me, 12 hours a day. I'll tell you more about it actually when we talk with Alan. I was struggling when I did not trust myself and my capabilities and kept looking at other writers and scholars. Although I enjoy learning from all of them, all the experts and masters in the area of psychology, philosophy, education, and I know that I've integrated their wisdom and knowledge within me for the past 30 years. I still had to allow myself to trust and share my experience of the past 30 years of sitting with my clients. So we all have something to say. We do. This is very apparent, obviously, in social media. The freedom to have a medium which you could share yourself with others has given lots of people the opportunity to do so. So there's also a sense of freedom that gets created when you're able to share who you are with people. Remember that the sharing will not be one way. So when you share your opinions, others will also be inspired to share theirs with you. So there might be some similarities, some differences, and some oppositions. You can see that in the relationships with your mate, with your family, children, at work, and now obviously in politics. Maturing to an emotional independence is really helpful and crucial when, as an adult, you put yourself out there and share yourself. Emotional independence meaning for you to own your thoughts, your opinions, your feelings, your emotions, and actions, and the possible impact that your attitude and sharing actually has on other people. Also, in receiving other people sharing to be responsible and own your way of hearing, interpreting, feeling, and reacting, and the possible impact of that way of being and acting on your life and other people. So share yourself with people around you. Share who you are, your unique way of seeing things and experiencing the world. Your way will always be unique to you. It is your signature. Share yourself respectfully. Honor others as you share your thoughts and opinions. Also, honor the uniqueness of others as they share who they are with you. Share with kind intentions and receive others' sharings as kind intentions. This is the way we can connect to each other, build trust and cohesiveness within our families and communities. And truly, we need that. We need that trust and cohesiveness again and again in the world and in our communities. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with 2 research about writing.
Hello, I'm Dr. Foojan, and I have great news for you. I'm offering a special time-limited offer to anyone who's interested in online therapy or coaching sessions. I've developed the awareness integration model, which allows in only 12 weeks to raise your self-esteem and confidence and let go of your thoughts and emotions that produce depression and anxiety for you. So call today to schedule your online session and save $600. Call me today at 818-648-2140. That's 818-648-2140. Or go to www.foojan.com.
So the first research, writing a to-do list at bedtime may aid in falling asleep. May 8th. This is what they say. I know it does. I've given it to all my clients for 30 years. I've done it myself. I'm telling you, based on experience, it really works. But they have the research according to a Bayer University study. Research compared sleep patterns of participants who took 5 minutes to write down upcoming duties versus participants who chronicled completed activities. We live in a 24/7 culture in which our to-do list seems to be constantly growing and causing us to worry about unfinished tasks at the bedtime. Most people just cycle through their to-do list in their head, and this study explored whether the act of writing them down could counteract nighttime difficulties with falling asleep. So some 40% of American adults report difficulty falling asleep at least a few times each month, according to the National Sleep Foundation. So the study of 57 university students conducted by Baylor Sleep Neuroscience and Cognition Laboratory was published in the American Psychological Association's Journal of Experimental Psychology. There are 2 schools of thought about this. One is that writing about the future would lead to increased worry about unfinished tasks and delay sleep, while journaling about completed activities should not trigger worry. The alternative hypothesis is that writing a to-do list will offload those thoughts and reduce worries. While anecdotal evidence exists that writing a bedtime list can help one fall asleep, the Baylor study used overnight polysomnography, the gold standard of sleep measurement. With that method, researchers monitor electrical brain activity using electrodes. Participants stayed in the lab on a weeknight to avoid weekend effects on bedtime, and because on a weekday night, they probably had unfinished tasks to do the next day. So they were divided into 2 randomly selected groups and given 5-minute writing assignments before retiring. One group was asked to write down everything they needed to remember to do next day or over the next few days. The others to write about tasks completed during the previous few days. Students were instructed they could go to bed at 10:30 p.m. and they had them in a controlled environment and absolutely restricted any technology, homework, and etc. It was simply light out. measures of personality, anxiety, and depressions might moderate the effect of writing on falling asleep, and that could be explored in other investigations. But they already had a good sample and recruited healthy young adults, and so they don't know whether these findings could generalize to patients with insomnia, though some writing activities have previously been suggested to benefit such a patients. I know with my own clients, the past 30 years, every time, again, not people who are majorly depressed or major anxiety driven, or the people who really have chronic insomnia. We're not talking about that. But people who have generalized anxiety disorders, or they're at times that are very, very stressed in life, or if they could actually put this as a ritual every night, it does really bring down the anxiety and just this concept of getting flooded right before you go to sleep. So it calms you down and it pushes you out, put all of these out. And then usually it's like, can you read something as a book? Like take a book actually, not through computer or any type of a screen. And usually if you shift your brain into something that you're interested, it's light, it's really nice, and your eyes are reading, usually you can fall asleep and have a safe sleep. And the anxiety of what's going to happen tomorrow, and I have to remember everything for tomorrow, and that stress kind of goes away. That has been my experience with a lot of the clients. The second research. For people going through a divorce, a technique called narrative expressive writing, not just writing about their emotions, but creating a meaningful narrative of their experience, may reduce the harmful cardiovascular effects of stress related to marital separation. Reports a study in Psychosomatic Medicine, Journal of Biobehavioral Medicine, the official journal of the American Psychosomatic Society. The journal is actually published by Walter Kluwer. So narrative expressive writing led to improvements in heart rate and an index of the heart's response to stress. The results suggested that the ability to create a structured narrative, not just the re-experiencing of emotions, but making meaning out of them, allows people to process their feelings in a more adaptive way, which may in turn help improve their cardiovascular health. The study included 109 adults, 70 women, and 39 men with a recent marital separation. Participants were randomly assigned to one of the 3 writing exercises, performed on 3 occasions on several days. One group performed a traditional expressive writing task with instructions to write freely about their strongest and deepest emotion. In a prior study, this approach seemed to increase actually separation-related emotional distress, particularly among participants with high psychological rumination, the tendency to persistently think about one's mood. Another group performed this, the one that they're saying it works, which is the narrative expressing writing task, in which they created a coherent and an organized narrative of their separation experience, culminating in describing an end of their divorce story. The third group was given an emotionally neutral writing task. Indicators of the body cardiovascular responses to stress were compared before and after the writing task and up to actually 9 months. Participants assigned to narrative expressive writing had a reduction in their heart rate, as well as the increase in heart rate variability, which measures beat-to-beat variations in heart rate. The higher variability reflects the better functioning of the body's parasympathetic nervous system reaction to stimuli, including stress. So these effects were moderate in size, heart rate, and in narrative expressive writing group was about 7 beats per minute lower than the other 2 groups, and were consistent across some stressful and non-stressful laboratory tasks, such as doing mental math. Blood pressure was unaffected. There was no evidence that expressive writing increased physical stress responses in people with a high degree of psychological rumination. From this work, the researchers made 2 specific conclusions. First, relative to 2 other conditions, narrative expressive writing caused the changes they observed in the cardiovascular biomarkers. This is a pretty striking result for just 60 minutes of writing, 60 minutes over 3 days. Second, the effect of narrative writing on these health-relevant biomarkers is independent of adult self-reported emotional responses about their separation. Creating narratives may be good for the heart, so to speak, but this does not mean there's this does not mean there corresponding improvement in the psychological well-being. So there's a difference between when you just kind of do this catharsis of just talking about your emotions and letting go. Some people, they don't release emotions that way. They just ruminate around it and they go into this pile and this constantly, they create more stress for themselves, especially if they've been traumatized by the divorce or any of the incidents. So the narrative one means that not only you're talking about it and sharing about it, but you're narrating. You're not in it. You remove yourself, you talk about it, and then as if you're also looking at what are the best and the worst possible. What did I learn? How can I complete? What do I need to complete? What were my responsibilities around it? And in any format that when you give a meaning to the experience you had, whether it was 1 year or 20 years, there's an experience that you had, and part of the grief process would be to reorganize and look at all of it. And it also creates some sort of completion, because we go through a grief process, and part of the grief process is holding and looping around the same concept. And this way of writing, where you're completing yourself, you're saying all that you needed to say, and complete that, you're also completing and moving forward with the divorce process. So you could use that on any level that you get upset with anybody, pretty much. And it's a great technique and intervention. So go for it, use it. Narrative expressive writing and to-do list at night. So I'm so excited to talk to Alan Gelb, the author of 7 Steps to Confident Writing. He is a seasoned writer of fiction and nonfiction, published novel with Putnam & Sons, St. Martin Press, and Del Avon, and more in 2008. And then he is also 10 Speed Press published his Concurring the College Admissions Essay in 10 Steps. Now it is in 3rd edition. The slim volume has taught thousands of students how to create a one-of-a-kind essay, and it's often ranked at #1 college essay book on Amazon. His last book, Having the Last Say, Capturing Your Legacy in One Small Story, builds on the work he has done with high school students to enable older people to engage in life review and create narratives, what we're talking about, that explores their values and beliefs. He's also the author of Most Likely to Succeed, Multiple Murder, and the Elusive Search for Justice in an American Town. And that was published 1990, which dealt with a quadruple homicide in New York. Don't go anywhere. We're going to be right back with Alan Gelb.
Hello, I'm Dr. Foojan, and I have great news for you. I'm offering a special time-limited offer to anyone who's interested in online therapy or coaching sessions. I've developed the awareness integration model, which allows in only 12 weeks to raise your self-esteem and confidence and let go of your thoughts and emotions that produce depression and anxiety for you. So call today to schedule your online session and save $600. Call me today at 818-648-2140. That's 818-648-2140. Or go to www.foojan.com.
Dr. Foojan Zeine is a psychotherapist, a marriage and family therapist, and a life coach with more than 27 years of experience. She is the author of the Awareness Integration Model, which has been researched and published in numerous international journals. Dr. Foojan has offices in Beverly Hills, Irvine, and Woodland Hills, California, and also consults online and by telephone. Make an appointment with her today by calling 818-648-2140 or go online online to www.foojan.com. That's www.foojan.com. Join the conversation every Monday afternoon at 3 p.m. Pacific for Inner Voice Heartfelt Chat with Dr. Foojan. Dr. Foojan is a radio and TV host, international speaker, psychotherapist, life coach, and the author of Life Reset, The Awareness Path to Create the Life You Want. She brings you the latest research and interviews with experts in the field of cognitive sciences. Anyone who loves to grow and create growth for humanity gets a voice on this call-in show. Inner Voice Heartfelt Chat with Dr. Foojan. Monday afternoons at 3 p.m. Pacific on Smart Talk KMET 1490 AM and on KMET1490am.com.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Inner Voice Show. I'm Dr. Foojan Zeine, and I'm so excited to have Alan Gelb, who is the author of 7 Steps to Confident Writing, with me. Welcome, Alan.
Hello, Foojan. Glad to be here.
Yes, it is awesome. I loved your book. I read it, and it actually gave me the confidence. This is not a cliche, Alan. Actually, it gave me the confidence. So thank you for the book, and I hope that as we talk about your book and all the points in it, for our listeners and for the people who are viewing us, that they also get inspired by it and start writing. I was telling you before I went to, for 8 days, I went to Vegas, just got myself into a small space where I couldn't go anywhere else, and just wrote. And before I read your book, I wouldn't even plan it that way, because I kept thinking there's no way that I can write for 12 hours. And I was just talking to other people, and I would get ghostwriters, and this is what I would do. But you have very good points and very inspiring. So thank you.
Well, that's great. That's music to my ears. But I don't want people to think they have to write for 12 hours straight, because that will, certainly drive them away in droves.
Go away and go to Vegas. So we can do this more efficiently at home.
Yes, you can do it as it is comfortable for you to do it. Yes. And one of the things I talk about in the book is the fact that, there's a lot of fear involved in writing. That's just sort of the baseline. It's true for professional writers. It's true for amateur writers, particularly those people who have been told throughout their lives that they're not good writers. So there's a lot of fear, and fear engenders procrastination. And we try to deal with that by offering some tips, and certainly working in manageable chunks of time is one of the tips. Yes.
One of the things that I've noticed with your background is you wrote novels, and then you wrote how-to books. The essay to write it for students, what you wrote today about how to write. And there's a way, it seems like, that you have, in your own experience, you have experienced the experience, you have written, you've gone through exploring, and then somehow you also decided to teach others. So tell me about this process within your own life.
Right. So I started with novels. I was a novelist for the first part of my career. I then went into a very absorbing experience writing about a multiple murder in the small town in upstate New York that I wound up living in for the next 30 odd years. But I've also worked in the world of soap opera. I've worked in, I've written marketing materials for colleges and universities. I've done lots of different kinds of writing, as most writers have to do to keep their heads above water. And about 12 years ago, I wrote a book called Conquering the College Admissions Essay in 10 Steps. This is about how to write that all-important essay in your college application, and that emerged out of my own life experience working with my own sons around that exercise. And that has been very successful. It's still in print. It's in its 3rd edition, and I work with students all over the world on their applications. I then went and did a book called Having the Last Say, Capturing Your Legacy in One Small Story, which takes the kind of life review exercise that 17 and 18-year-olds do for these college admissions essays, and applies it to people who, baby boomers and older, who want to sort of capture an ethical value that they've lived by and leave a keepsake for their loved ones, or even something that might be read at their own memorial service. And then, I realized that I've spent so much time in the trenches working with lay writers, people who are not, necessarily interested or well-versed in writing, that I came up with some theories that I think really will help anybody who wants to sit down to write something. And that's how 7 Steps to Confident Writing emerged.
Alan, I think that everybody, in one way or another, as you were talking, has the, let's say, opportunity to write. Whether it's happening in Twitter in 160 characters or less all day, or it's actually doing something for a job offer or essays to go to school. Or, as you said, people who get older, they really do get into a space of wanting to share their stories and who they are and what they really believe in, and kind of give their wisdom away. And although I get it that life has become more video and present, but writing has not gone away. And I can still see that although it's gotten more concise and people do it in a shorter version, but writing isn't going away at all. So it's nice for you to create this step-by-step way where someone can actually read and go through and follow your steps. So one of the steps that I got from you which is in the book, is actually understanding who you're writing for, because the audience is very important in how you do it. Like the style of writing would be different, or not only the content, but the style of writing would be different if you are trying to get a job, or you're trying to get to go to school, or you're trying to just share your life with someone, which, not only you're sharing it, but it also needs to be entertaining, or you're in any points. It just seems like you got to know who these people are that you're writing to. How do we do that? How do we envision that concept?
Right. Well, I use the example of Foojan in the book of when I was writing materials for colleges and universities. And I worked in 2 different sort of arenas in that area. I wrote recruitment materials, such as brochures that people pick up when they go to visit a college. And I wrote fundraising materials that go to alumni who, are older and hopefully more affluent. And with each of those instances, I had to envision who it was that was going to be reading these materials. That said, there were constants, things that were constant about my writing for both of those audiences, which actually served me very well. So when I wrote for students, I didn't write down to them. I wrote, as if
we're peers.
I respected their intelligence and I was looking to communicate with them effectively. When I wrote for an older audience, I didn't rely on the kind of foundation, sort of gassy, jargony kind of stuff about potential and all this stuff that you get in your letters from the hospitals and your alma mater. I wrote in a more conversational kind of voice that the people who are hiring me found to be quite refreshing. So one of the things I talk about in the book to help people understand how to reach their audience is to determine what their voice is. And I have a diagnostic in the book in which I, have a list of probably 40 descriptors, words ranging from, ironic to serious to witty to, sarcastic, let's say. And I ask people to do this exercise on their own, also with their friends, with their family, and sort of determine, what is my voice like? How do people hear me, If you don't like their answers and want to adjust your voice, you can do that. But if you think that what you're hearing from people is what you're thinking about yourself and that you do have an authentic voice, you want to sort of capitalize that and use that voice to make connections through your writing.
Wonderful. You also wrote about how we fall short on communication styles. So you talked about the insecure communicator, the inconsiderate communicator, the inappropriate one, or the inaccessible or inexact. So talk a little bit about what are these differences between these types of communicators, and does that come through the tonality and the words that we're actually using when we're writing?
Sure. So I talk in the book about the fact that there's a contract between a writer and a reader, and there's also a contract between the writer and himself or herself. So the contract between writer and reader is based on certain precepts that you're going to be concise, let's say. You're going to be clear. You're going to provide something that has colorful writing rather than flat writing. You're going to be respectful of tone so that you don't sound overly formal or overly informal. So there's a number of, as I say, precepts about that contract that you are committing yourself to observe. At the same time, you have this contract with yourself that you're going to be committed to the process, because writing is a very rigorous process, you know, and you have to hang in there. You have to go through the number of drafts that a piece of writing conveys. And I think, you know, what I convey to novice writers about drafting is very valuable, because too many people see writing as this sort of amorphous activity that they either do well or don't do well. And when they get into a writing project, they don't know where it's going to go. And I want people to understand that it goes through a process, which is called drafting, and that each draft has a different focus, you know, and when you understand what the various focuses are, you feel much more anchored in that process.
So, for example, my glitch that I had in my my idea is English is my second language. So, and when I was a child, I had to learn like 3 or 4 languages. So for some reason, I decided, who cares about grammar? I don't care about grammar. Plus that every language I learned, they had really strict rules of grammar. And then when it came to English, everything was exception to the rules with the grammar. And I'm like, I just don't care about grammar. Well, hello, like you cannot talk in another language without a grammar, especially you can't write. Because when you're talking, I think that people adjust their listening to your grammar, even if it's not working well. But when you write, that is really like shows. So my biggest beef with myself was, obviously I can't do grammar, you know. So it would hold me back. So I would look at myself and get really insecure about writing. And it also felt like as I'm writing, anything that goes into from my head to the writing, as I went and I did the first draft and then I went to the second one, I'm like, what did I say? None of this makes sense, because in my head made so much of a beautiful sense. And then as it lands on the paper and I go back, I'm like, what did that even mean? What was I meaning? So tell me a little bit about, like, when you say there's different drafts and you do different ones, what do I do with these drafts?
Well, the problem that you're talking about, which is certainly not specific to non-native English speakers, but applies just as much to people for whom English is their first language, is this idea that, there are tons of rules, and I can't even begin to penetrate this process because I'm so frightened of the rules. And often people are frightened of the rules because they've been chastised for not following the rules by early teachers and people like that. So what I'm setting out to do in this book is to give people a holistic view of what writing is all about, so that they understand that it's not just about rules. Yes, there are rules in writing, but there are also easy ways to get better at it. So one of my motivations in writing this book was the fact that I have worked with so many people who don't identify themselves as writers. I work every year, with a whole batch of students who are STEM-oriented, science, technology, engineering, math. They don't identify as writers. They're not that interested in it, but they're good learners, So I want, what I do with them is often what I do with them, if they have a hard time sort of finding their way around a page and getting hung up on grammar, as you are talking about, I give them quick, easy solutions. For instance, I say start your sentences with a verb and a noun. Okay, I went to the. I drove down the highway. Let's say. Too often, writers who are not experienced will start with subordinate clauses. Let's say and they sort of don't know how to track a sentence and they get totally lost in it. But if you start with a noun and a subject, you will be anchored in the sentence, and as you get more adept at your writing, you can mix it up. But nobody. One of the things I tell my writers is that nobody will hold clean, simple language against you. They like that. They like clean, simple, muscular language. It's the fancy stuff that so often gets tangled up that will make them crazy.
You are so accurate. That is so true. You also talk about basic qualities of writing, and you talk about 6 C's: clarity, conciseness, construction, color, courtesy, and commitment. Can you say a bit about each one of them?
Yes. So that goes back to that idea of the contract. This contract with the reader is based on those 5 C's, 5 or 6. I'm not sure. 6. Okay. And I probably won't remember what they all are. So
clarity. So let's talk about clarity.
If you can prompt me one at a time. Clarity basically means the reader will come away understanding what he or she has read. Very important. Conciseness has to do with the fact that we need to make a piece of writing as tight and as brief as it can be. Now, I'm not saying everything has to be, a solid nugget and, you're in and out of it in 5 minutes, but there is no excuse for padding. There's no excuse for using a reader's time unnecessarily. Color.
I think that's also true for talking, because I think you bore them and then they get frustrated because a brain will say, I got it already, move on. And I could see that making it concise really keeps the reader up to wanting more because they got it. Now they want the next information and the next way of being. I got that. Construction.
Construction means that you're going to create a solidly structured piece of writing. People will understand what the beginning, middle, and end of your piece is, and it doesn't necessarily have to go in that order. But they will feel like, they're on a steady ship. They're not going to get lost in the middle of it. You mentioned color. I mentioned that briefly before. We want to give our writing tone and shades, and we want there to be interesting word choices. We talked about courtesy, which is the fact that you are going to be writing to somebody, not at somebody. So there's a basic kind of idea of communication with the writer. This is somebody who's reading your piece, so you want to take that person's feelings into account, okay? Not to be overly formal, not to be overly informal, that sort of thing. And maybe there's another C in there, but I don't remember. Commitment, yeah, that's the one that talks about the idea of rigor and that you're going to be committed to the process that you're invested in.
And you also talk about gearing up. And I think that's also very important, because I had the experience that anytime I'm gearing up to actually do that, it just seems like I will do everything in my house and everything that is not necessary just not to get to the task, because it's almost like my anxiety is getting up and I want to gear up to do it. And then I distract myself. And I noticed that something that I noticed about myself, which I don't know if the listeners or audience can relate to or not. I don't find myself, I'm not an editor, and I don't know how to take somebody else's writing or somebody else's even structures and follow through. It's very difficult for me. Like, I want to do whatever I want to do. I don't want to follow structures. And it's interesting that when I'm left to my own way of doing things, then it flows. But I restrict myself when I have to fit myself within a particular structure. it's not workable because the world has a structure, and if you're going to give your essay to a school or a resume to somebody or your book to a publisher, people expect a structure. And so what are your suggestions about gearing up in doing something and then being you and kind of trusting who you are, but also then respecting the structure that needs to actually be out there for publishers or other people?
So the gearing up piece of it is, and when you talk about, when you sit down to write a piece of writing, you're looking around your house and you're saying, hey, that thing needs dusting over there, and I'm going to go do that, and we all do that. That's the fear factor that I talk about. And the reason why writing is very filled with fear is because what we're essentially trying to do is to align our vision and our execution. And those two things are often poles apart. And getting them to go together is a lot of work, no matter what piece of writing you're sitting down to work on. So yes, let's allow ourselves some fear. Let's recognize that the procrastination is an ailment that affects almost every writer, and I talk about certain remedies that are available to anyone that will help with that problem, such as setting yourself a quota, for instance. You have to write 1,000 words, stretch it out over 4 days, and give yourself 250 words a day. Give yourself a reward at the end of it. I don't know, ice cream cone, walk with the dog, whatever you like. The idea of structure, however, now if you were to say to me, I don't really like structure, I'm going to say, well, Foojan, I hear you, but, a piece of writing demands structure, because, again, you're writing for somebody, and they're not going to have the patience to wend their way along your piece of writing until you find out what it is you want to say. But you're allowed to have your own style of finding your structure. And if you're somebody who, feels like you don't want to be in a tight spot regarding structure, you can simply say, you know what, I'm going to give myself more drafts, and then I want to go back to the idea of drafts, because in the first draft, I say every draft has a purpose and a focus. The first draft is often all about structure, I've written this thing, it's kind of a mess. Let me see what I can do to develop the structure. Many novice writers feel like the only way they can construct a piece of writing is in a linear fashion. They start and line it up like little toy soldiers, each paragraph. That can be, it can be very liberating for people when they see that structure is very flexible. You might start your piece at the end and then work your way back to that place, and you'll feel like there's something very dynamic going on in the piece. Then we get on to the second draft. We may still have a bunch of structural work to do, and that's fine, but maybe we'll also start looking at issues of tone. Is our tone too formal? Are we using too many passive constructions, which lends itself to formality and, or I should say, creates a formal and kind of a stuffy air? And that's an easy fix if we understand what a passive construction is. And of course, my book explains that. We also might deal with issues of point of view. Is this story going to be more dynamic if I tell it in the first person? Or is it going to work better if I tell it in the third person? You're probably not going to tell anything in the second person, so don't worry about that. Third draft, these issues, we're pulling them along, still focusing on them, but we may also start looking at issues of like word choice, more specific, focused kinds of issues like, I don't really like that word. Why don't I like it? Can I figure it out? Does it sound too much like something I pulled out of a thesaurus? And in fact, I did do that, and there's a lot of dangers in doing that. Let me play around with that. We keep going with these drafts, and then we get into the polishing phase where we make everything very lovely. And so what I'm saying in answer to your question is that impulse that you have not to be structured, you can deal with that just by, if you're willing to, add more drafts.
And so allow myself to first just pour it all out and then go back and do it systematically where, as you said, take on one concept, go through it, and then take on the next concept.
Right.
You also talked about telling stories, and I know that even when I go to do public speaking, many times now telling stories is important because it's not just the contextual or the concept that I'm going to say to someone, which might be a little bit more abstract, but bringing that where any type of an abstract conversation might land on someone on a particular level, but bringing it down to their stories will also make it much more emotional for them, and not just cognitive, but also emotional. And they can find themselves somehow in the stories. What do you mean by telling stories? This is what showed up for me.
Right. So because of my experience as a novelist and a writer of fiction, I love stories, and I think everybody loves stories. And the success of my college essay book was really tied to the idea that what you want to do in this situation where you're going to try to present yourself in a certain light and make yourself memorable to somebody who's reading, thousands of essays, is that you're going to use the narrative, okay? Narrative, and I use that word interchangeably with stories, is something that people remember because they like to hear it. Ever since the dawn of time, whoever told good stories was the popular guy around the campfire, So what I talk about in this book is that you can use the narrative or elements of the narrative, and I distill those elements to 4 of them that I talk about in the book. That understanding of the narrative can work its way into any number of writing situations. For instance, I use the example of a letter to the editor, where I give one version which is quite dry. I went to my son's high school music concert the other day, and it was so impressive. The students were so well prepared. The musical choices were excellent, and I really advise everybody to support the high school music program. That's a yawn. There's nothing going on there. The second version of that letter to the editor starts with a narrative feeling about being in that room, seeing the students on stage wearing their orchestra, outfits, hearing the music, hearing them tune their instruments, and
like building an image.
Yes, building it up and creating an excitement, and then going into the more sort of declarative parts of the letter, things that you want to convey, because basically you want people to support this program. But that kind of element can be so powerful in so many different kinds of writing experiences. Even a letter of complaint. You had a bad night in the motel, and you're trying to get your money back. If you can infuse such a letter with some kind of storytelling element, you're going to capture the attention of that person who's reading it.
I'm hearing from you that if you could induce all the 5 senses, that they can kind of imagine them being there, bringing the whole thing into a present moment where you're taking these people with you into that space. Is that what
Exactly.
I'm also hearing? Okay.
Exactly.
And you're saying that this doesn't necessarily always have to be in novels, because obviously that's where we see it in novels and screenplays and all of that. But this can actually be in any way that you talk or you write, and in that you can bring people into their present moment, sensing everything, and that's what gets them fired up a bit.
Right. When we think of the power of the novelists that we love, whether it's Tolkien or Margaret Mitchell in Gone with the Wind, or whoever, and the way they can bring us into these worlds and keep us there for 1,000 pages, for us to have one little iota of that is still very powerful.
Yes. So when you talk about if somebody actually is trying to start writing about their life and the memoir, and you said kind of is the same thing that when teenagers are trying to go from one phase of their life to the next. And also you've worked with a lot of people who at their elder age, they were looking at their life stories and looking at what is it that they can say about who they are. If their whole life was one story and they were going to share it, how would you help them? What is it that they need to actually look at?
So that's a good question, Foojan, and that's the question that I often hear as soon as I start working with anybody, whether they're a high school student or an older person. They say, first of all, a lot of times they say, I don't have anything to write about. Then they say, I don't know what I'm going to write about. And so I have devised a discovery process that I use with both sets of writers, and that people can use on their own if they work with these books. Basically, it involves asking yourself a set of questions that are far-ranging, that cover a lot of areas in your life, and often surprising questions. And then you start seeing the relationships between them, like how one can get you into another, and you can begin to develop a multi-layered kind of essay that is really interesting to read. So that really is the essence of the process around finding something to write about.
And where can people find that? On your website or another book, or?
Well, those are, that process that I'm describing is in my book, Conquering the College Admissions Essay in 10 Steps. It's also in Having the Last Say, Capturing Your Legacy in One Small Story. And you can find out all about all of my books, including my new one, 7 Steps to Confident Writing, on my website, which is alangelb.com.
alangelb.com.
That's correct.
Is there anything we missed and you've got to let people know in the last 1 minute?
I just really want people to understand that writing is and should be something that is available to everyone. I want to get people beyond the feeling that this is something that you're good at or not good at. It's something that you can improve in your own time as you improve at a lot of things, okay? If you want to learn a language, a foreign language, you can do it, 10 minutes a day using some internet device. If you want to be good at writing, you can give yourself a set of exercises and you can, experiment with it, and you will become a better writer.
I can say that after, let me say before, although I wrote my first book on 2008, and I wrote 2 books in different languages and then went back into English and wrote 2 other books, but I could never call myself a writer. When they introduced me somewhere, they would say writer, because I obviously have 5 books out, but I didn't own, because I was very insecure all the time. And I could tell you that after reading the book, going through it, and then this past episode of 8 days of just writing, I did feel the confidence, as I can own that part and that skill and say I am. And I can't say, I'm an amazing or a great writer, but at least I can say I'm a writer. And I think this is what your book gave me as what it says, a confident writer. I got that. And gave me a lot of great steps to work through. So I hope that every one of you who's listening to us or hearing us, pick this up. 7 Steps to Confident Writing by Alan Gelb. Go to alangelb.com to get this book and other books. And thank you so much for being on my show. I learned a lot from your book and today talking to you.
Thank you so much, Foojan. I enjoyed being with you.
And for all of you who are out there, create an amazing week for yourself and everyone around you, actually. And don't forget, go to the podcast and sign up, subscribe, email me, tell me all the other things that you want to hear about, and then I'll make sure that either I will talk about it or we'll have experts to talk about it together. Love you. Bye.
The Inner Voice